The Green Knight has probably got to be one of the biggest disappointments of the year so far, not because it's awful, just because it's really not as special as the hype led it to be. A24 have a reputation of making outstanding films, and I thought that an arty retelling of an Arthurian legend would be a no-brainer. Sadly, The Green Knight leans too far into the arty side of things rather than the legend. The film is truly a treat for the eyes. Every single shot in it is absolutely gorgeous and are each like their own individual paintings. This is not only due to some fantastic cinematography, but also some absolutely beautiful locations that are perfect for the look of the film. This also goes for some of the practical effects. The Green Knight himself looks brilliant, and because of this, the scenes with him were my absolute favourites of the film, though the CGI in a lot of places leaves a lot to be desired. The same is true of the soundtrack, which, while not being the most overwhelming score I've ever heard, is still thematic and really elevates a lot of the scenes, especially those with no dialogue. The acting all around is pretty great. Dev Patel gives a good sort of wimpy performance as Gawain. Honestly, he's not playing too far off his usual type, but he's an enjoyable presence on the screen nevertheless. He manages to give some of the more emotional scenes the way they deserve. Sean Harris rarely ever gives a bad performance, even in some of the terrible films I've seen him in. The Green Knight is no exception. He's not in the film much, but he's a weighty presence in the film whenever he's on screen. Alicia Vikander, Barry Keoghan and Joel Edgerton are all the other names that make up this pretty stellar cast. They've all basically got a few scenes between them and are just there for certain parts of the story. So while they're all pretty good, none are really on screen enough to elevate or ruin the film. Vikander does play two parts for some reason, so is more present than the others. It's definitely commendable for someone who isn't a native English speaker to be quite talented at regional English accents. Erin Kellyman is also a member of the cast. Since The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I've been on bad terms with Kellyman. She's one of the main reasons that show was as awful as it was, and here she does nothing to change my mind about her. Granted, she's not awful in the film, but her scenes are relatively pointless and didn't add much for me. And so now we come on to why The Green Knight was a slight disappointment to me. It's directing. David Lowery has got loads of style and flair to show off, and for the most part it pays off. This is one of the most unique looking films you'll see this year by a long shot. However, it's very clear that Lowery is prone to a bit of self-indulgence, as several of the scenes in this film could definitely have been cut out. The Green Knight is filled to the brim with fluff and has a serious pacing issue that keeps it from being the brilliant film it could have been. This film could quite easily have been 90 to 100 minutes, but it ends up at a rather torturous 130, and it really feels like it. Much of Gawain's journey is very plodded out and slow, and could have been filled with much more interesting interactions than what was given. I never went into this film expecting there to be much in the way of action sequences, but maybe that's what this film needed from being a bit of a slog. You don't get much of an emotional attachment to Gawain, so seeing him do more may have made him more interesting. It also doesn't help that the dialogue is almost Shakespearean, meaning you won't quite know what everyone is saying all of the time without subtitles. Wondering what a character just said every 10 or so minutes doesn't help your film flow any better. What's more is that the story isn't the most epic. Some of it doesn't seem to make much sense, with bizarre character decisions that stop the film being completely believable, despite obviously being a fantasy. This is obviously more to do with the source material being a few centuries old, I'm sure, so I can't fault the writers completely. Despite a lot of its flaws, The Green Knight is still a standout film of the year. It's a beautifully crafted example of directing flair and could stand on its own as a piece of art. If anything, The Green Knight makes me want to see more arty takes on classic stories in the years to come. However, David Lowery was given too much freedom, and as a result the film often comes off as an overlong, bloated and confusing thought piece. The Green Knight gets a Deight score of 7. Happy dating, you loners.